Right now, Iran is at war. Airstrikes have hit strategic locations across the country. Explosions have been reported near major cities. Missiles and drones are moving across the region. The confrontation involving Iran, Israel, and the United States has pushed the Middle East into one of its most dangerous moments in decades. But beneath the headlines about missiles and military strikes lies another story. For years, Iran had been planning massive infrastructure ambitions, new international rail corridors, strategic ports along the Indian Ocean, major energy projects designed to power the country for decades, projects that could transform Iran into one of the most important transit hubs on Earth. Now, the country finds itself in a very different situation. A nation that once focused on long-term infrastructure planning is suddenly dealing with something far more immediate: war. So the question is no longer just about megaprojects. It's about whether those ambitions can even survive the geopolitical storm now unfolding. Before the current conflict escalated, Iran had been pursuing a clear strategic vision, used geography as power. Look at the map and the logic becomes obvious. Iran sits between several major regions of the world: Central Asia to the north, the Persian Gulf to the south, Turkey and Europe to the west, South Asia and the Indian Ocean to the east. For centuries, trade between these regions passed through similar corridors. Modern infrastructure could revive that idea on a much larger scale. One of the most important examples is the International North-South Transport Corridor, often called the INSTIC. This corridor was designed to link India, Iran, the Caucasus, Russia, and Europe through a combination of railways, ports, and shipping routes. Instead of cargo traveling the long way around through the Suez Canal, goods could move across Iran in a much shorter land route. Another example is Iran's ambition to expand its national railway network, linking major industrial cities and border crossings. These systems were meant to turn Iran into a bridge between continents. The country's infrastructure ambitions were not simply domestic development projects. They were part of a geopolitical strategy. But grand plans require time. And time is exactly what war disrupts. Because modern conflicts rarely stay limited to battlefields, they spread into ports, trade routes, energy systems, and the infrastructure that keeps entire economies running. In modern warfare, infrastructure often becomes a strategic target. Energy facilities can cripple a country's economy. Ports can disrupt international trade. Transportation corridors can affect how quickly supplies move. For Iran, several of these systems are particularly sensitive. One of the most important is Hague Island, the main oil export terminal in the Persian Gulf. A significant share of Iran's oil exports pass through this island. Another strategic location is the port of Bandar Abbas, Iran's largest commercial port and a critical gateway for imports and exports. If operations at places like these are disrupted, the consequences extend far beyond military strategy. They affect the entire economy. And when infrastructure becomes part of the battlefield, long-term development plans suddenly become uncertain. But Iran's infrastructure ambitions were never just about domestic projects. They were also connected to something much larger: a global network of trade routes being built by another superpower: China. China has spent the last decade building a massive global infrastructure strategy known as the Belt and Road Initiative. The goal is to create new economic corridors connecting Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Railways, ports, industrial zones. And when analysts map these networks across Eurasia, one country appears in a particularly strategic position: Iran. Geographically, Iran sits between Central Asia and the Middle East, directly along potential trade routes linking China to Europe. One example of China's involvement in Iranian infrastructure is the Tehran-Qom-Isfahan high-speed rail project. This project was designed to introduce high-speed rail to Iran, connecting major cities and reducing travel times dramatically. Another example is Chinese participation in railway modernization projects intended to increase freight capacity across Iran's rail network. For China, the strategic logic is clear. A stable Iran could become a key land corridor linking Asia to European markets. But war introduces a level of unpredictability that long-term infrastructure networks struggle to absorb. Yet, China's interest in Iran goes beyond geography, because Iran also holds something China needs: energy. Iran possesses some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world. Energy exports have long been one of the country's most important economic resources. Despite sanctions and geopolitical tensions, China has remained one of the largest buyers of Iranian oil. Energy shipments flowing east help sustain Iran's economy, and that economic relationship has been tied to broader cooperation. Infrastructure investment, industrial projects, long-term strategic partnerships. Some analysts describe this relationship as a form of strategic exchange. Energy security for China, economic resilience for Iran, but war complicates everything. Because conflicts introduce uncertainty not only for governments, but also for companies, investors, and international infrastructure networks. And nowhere is that uncertainty more visible than in the systems that power a modern economy. Energy infrastructure. Iran's energy network stretches across the country. Oil export terminals along the Persian Gulf, gas fields such as the massive South Pars gas field, one of the largest natural gas reserves on Earth, and power plants supplying electricity to major cities. Iran has also invested heavily in nuclear energy infrastructure. The Bushehr nuclear power plant, located on the Persian Gulf coast, represents one of the most significant energy projects in the country. Additional reactors have long been part of broader plans to expand electricity production. Energy infrastructure like this represents national strength in peacetime, but in conflict it becomes strategically sensitive. Disruptions can ripple across industries, transportation systems, and everyday life, and protecting such vast networks becomes increasingly difficult when geopolitical tensions escalate. Which leads to a much bigger question. What happens to long-term national ambitions when a country suddenly finds itself focused on survival? Megaprojects are designed with decades in mind. Rail corridors like the International North-South Transport Corridor were envisioned as permanent trade routes linking continents. Ports like Chabahar, located on Iran's southeastern coast along the Indian Ocean, were meant to expand regional trade and provide new access routes to global markets. Railways connecting major Iranian cities and neighboring countries were intended to increase cargo flows across Eurasia, but war changes the timeline. Supply chains become uncertain. International partnerships grow more complicated. Investments become cautious. For a country whose infrastructure ambitions were tied closely to regional trade networks, conflict introduces a level of unpredictability that no engineering blueprint can fully account for. And yet the ambitions themselves do not disappear. Infrastructure visions often outlive political crises. Sometimes they even shape how countries rebuild after them. Right now, Iran exists in two very different realities. In one reality, there is a long-term vision: railways linking continents, ports reshaping global trade, energy systems powering a modern economy. In the other reality, there is war, missile strikes, geopolitical confrontation, and a deeply uncertain regional future. Whether Iran's megaproject ambitions eventually reshape global trade or remain overshadowed by conflict is impossible to know today, because in moments like these, even the largest infrastructure visions must compete with something far more immediate: survival. And until the war itself finds a resolution, the future of those ambitions will remain uncertain.